Ward 1 Councillor Stephen Dasko, who is running for mayor. He's in studio. Stephen Dasko, good morning.
Well, good morning, David. Thank you so much for having me on this morning.
Very glad to have you here. And we're going to ask all the candidates the same first question, and that is, as quickly as you can, 30 seconds, explain how you're different from the other leading candidates in this race.
Well, I'm different because I'm a lifelong resident. I'm very passionate about our city. I am very driven to make sure that we don't just have a good city of Mississauga, we have a great city of Mississauga, and it's something that I've never aspired to represent any other level of government. It's always been Mississauga first and only, and this is an opportunity, I believe, to build what I think is a great world-class city, and that's where my passion lies, and that's why I'm putting my name forward for June 10th.
Anywhere we are in the GTA, we talk about housing affordability. Mississauga, no exception to that. But at City Council, you have opposed fourplexes, opposed removing parking minimums for new developments along that Huron-Ontario line, opposed density in your ward at times. What is it that you're trying to say to voters through your voting action at Council about your willingness to do what might be needed to actually intensify?
Sure. And first of all, a lot of what you're saying, I think, very much taken out of context.
Yeah, go on. Provide the context here.
The context is the area that I represent right now, which happens to be right on the shores of Lake Ontario. It goes to a railway track, and if you make it out of the railway track, it goes up to a highway. We do have Lakeshore Road. That is the only east-west access point that goes through, of which 60% of that traffic is not local. It's commuter traffic. We have an official plan in place and local area plans in place. We have prescribed growth. We also have over 40% of all the development for the entire city of Mississauga in Ward 1 right now. And so it's not about opposing anything. It's about getting it right. Building a great waterfront. We have 145 acres of new waterfront parkland that we're putting in and a conservation area. And also, we're building out what I think are some great complete communities. Mm-hmm. And it's building the plan, it's getting it right. It's when you deviate from the plan that this is where things happen. And with regards to fourplexes, this I thought was bungled, quite frankly, by the city because we didn't do our homework. Hazel McCallion was a great friend of mine, an incredible mentor. Mm-hmm. She always said, do your homework. When this was put on us by the federal government, it was very much pushed through. What I asked for was a brief period where we could actually have a consultation with our residents, ask planning staff if this was considered good planning, and if this was practical by the building industry. We didn't do any of that. We just rushed through. We were supposed to get $120 million to blanket change our zoning right across the city. And instead, we ended up with $113 million, of which we've only received one partial payment on so far. Now, for me, it's not about being against fourplexes. I think in the right places, it makes a ton of sense. But blanket right across the entire city.
Where are the right
places? Again, closer to transit lines where we have areas that people can actually get into using transit, where there's employment opportunities around.
So, I talk about transit
some of the areas we're talking about are lots that are anywhere from $2 to $4 million. And if you divide them into four, it doesn't make anything affordable. And we've also got 2 applications right now that are coming through. Mm-hmm. They also happen to be in the ward I represent. And so I'm not against them. I was against the process of how it was put forward because we didn't do our homework.
You talk about intensifying along transit lines. So one of those transit lines will be the Huron-Ontario line, but you actually removed your ward from a motion that would have incentivized developers to build along that Huron-Ontario line by removing parking minimums. Why did you do that?
Well, because a lot of what we do right now, and again, it's this is something that I receive an awful lot of these applications, mm-hmm. And we end up working that through the whole development application process, and this is something that we work on currently right now. So it's have we reduced parking minimums in a few of the developments that we're doing, especially around the Port Credit GO Train parking lot. This is a lot of the area that we're talking about, that area, and we have. have. We've also come up with more visitor parking because part of what happened, which is unique and is not part of the story, I think people like to talk about political things at political times, but what they don't talk about is where we've got a significant development going on right now. That was in place of what was supposed to be a 3-level GO Train parking garage, and Metrolinx all of a sudden decided to get out of the parking business. So we now have 2 towers that are going to be going up. One is 39 stories. The other one is 36 stories. Another one's 29 stories. And what we were supposed to have was a maximum height of 22 stories with a 3-story parking garage. So what we've had to do is actually put in parking on behalf of the city for people, because people are going to go somewhere. We have a need for parking in Port Credit right now. This is something that we hear day in, day out, and so we're coming up with solutions for it. But I want to make sure that we make practical, common sense solutions as opposed to just what something might sound good for a political headline.
Let's talk about bike lanes, because you and I met at the debate that CBC hosted last week in the city of Mississauga. You were there, and it actually, bike lanes became, I think, the most contentious issue of that debate. At that debate, you called out one of your rivals in this race, Councillor Dipika Damerla, for saying that she will stop the plan to reduce Bloor Street to three lanes from four, to try to install these bike lanes. You voted for this plan, but in your platform, you go on to say that the council should review these changes. I'm trying to sort of understand what your position is. You said, as a councillor, let's do this, and now as a mayoral candidate, you're saying, let's re-look at it. How do we cross that T?
Sure. Well, going through this, in how we do things in the city of Mississauga, and I know a lot of other councils do this as well. The ward councillor does a lot of the work when it comes to public consultation, working with staff, doing all of these types of things. And so with regards to Bloor Street, which has become very political right now, unfortunately during an election period, is what we've got. A plan was passed a year ago. There were 6 different options over 3 years that were presented to residents. The option that was selected was, as they call, option 6. That removes a lane of vehicular traffic on either side, and so that was passed. It was put through and voted on by myself and others, along with the ward councillor, and also an extensive staff report that went through that as well. And so as we do things, again, coming back to doing our homework, a lot of where we base our decisions are off staff reports. Also, not being tone deaf to what's going on in the
but I just
community.
want to get to you supported this plan. Why are you saying it should be reviewed
so,
now?
And again, this is where I'm going with this, is not being tone deaf to what's happening in our community. I know that there's a significant amount of people that are not happy with what that decision was. And what I've said is because no mayor, no councillor can unilaterally go out and cancel anything. And if that was to be said, it's just plainly false. It's not true. It's misleading, and this is something that I find, quite frankly, offensive to people that are out that would be casting a ballot based on something like that. What I have said is, maybe this is a time to take a pause. I'll put forward a motion because I voted in the affirmative, so I am able to do it. I would put forward a motion, and council would have to decide if we would take a review of that decision. That's the only way that we would be able to have a look at it. And so that's what I put forward. It's really to say, let's just take a step back for a second. Let's make sure that that the decisions that were being made, were in fact the right ones. But also looking at what is the underlying, and that's safety for everybody is the most important.
I want to get to transit before I let you go. You have said you want to build a subway line along Dundas, and it would connect Kipling subway station in Toronto with the Hazel McCallion Light Rapid Transit line in Mississauga. The question is, how do you pay for that?
Absolutely. Great
Subways
question.
are very expensive. And
Subways
they can be
are, but they're well worth it if they're done well. And this is our great opportunity. You talk about earlier issues with how I look at density. This to me is really how you build a great east-west corridor, one that you can put a lot of density on.
But to put it bluntly, the city of Mississauga can't pay for this itself. It doesn't have the money, so it needs another level of government or someone else to do it.
What gives
you the confidence?
Well, right now we have
will?
over $300 million in place for a bus rapid transit line that would go from the Toronto border out to the University of Toronto Mississauga campus. And I would suggest that we use that as a down payment. work with our other levels of government, absolutely. But we do what you call cut and cover. So that's an open trench versus boring. It reduces our cost by 50%. And on top of that, we have heights along that corridor, which are 12 to 25 stories. And what I would say is, let's allow the developers to go higher, build more. And what we would do with anything that's over what they're allowed in the official plan for that whole area is to have a levy that would go directly into helping fund that subway line. It makes great economic sense. It gets our shovels in the ground. It's also working along with the province, who they love building infrastructure right now. This is something that we have seen. They've been doing it all over Ontario. This is a great legacy project, and it really builds out our city. It makes practical common sense, because we're having that gateway now in and out of downtown Toronto. It allows us to intensify along the Dundas corridor. And not only that, but it really brings in what I think is excellence for the city of Mississauga, and it taps into the Hazel-McCallion line, which runs north-south. Then we can start building real great world-class infrastructure for the city and great city building.
Stephen Dasko, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Mississauga chooses its new mayor on Monday, June 10th. Alvin Tedjo is one of the candidates. He is now councillor for Ward 2, but this morning he's in studio to share his vision for the studio. Alvin, good morning.
Good morning, David. Good to be here, and I did take transit in today, so hopefully it doesn't get worse tomorrow.
Hopefully it does not. I want to start with something that's a bit more rapid fire, as we're asking all the candidates. You have 30 seconds, basically. Can you just explain how you are different from the other candidates?
Absolutely. You know, I'm so excited about the future of City of Mississauga, and I'm so invested. My parents are seniors. They moved here when I was 4 years old, and they saw lots of opportunity in the city. They saw housing that was affordable. I've got 3 young kids. They're 9, 11, and 13, and I want them to be able to do what I did, which is live in the community they grew up in. And the city right now is unaffordable. Housing is almost impossible to find, even rental housing. And we need a new leader who's got a plan for the future, who's invested, who's going to be here for the long haul, and is, you know, energized and engaged and has a vision that will help build the future of the city.
Okay, let me jump in on one of the things you talked about, and that is housing. You've said you will use strong mayor powers to get housing built in Mississauga. There may be some who are concerned that you would bulldoze any local opposition by doing so. How do you assuage any of those concerns?
You know, we have a really, really comprehensive plan, and I'm really proud of it. We spent a lot of time working with different builders, residents, unions. Jennifer Keesmatz approved our plan and said this is the most comprehensive, detailed plan she's seen a municipality go through, because we wanted to make sure we got it right. We wanted to make sure that we found ways for the city to build the housing, to approve the housing, to bring in the partners that we need for the city of Mississauga, to get a lot of the regulations out of the way that get in the way, that are essentially there to prevent housing from getting built. Now, in terms of local consultation, absolutely. We're going to continue talking with residents about what is appropriate. But we're looking at, you know, major streets, 6 stories as of right. We're looking at transit-oriented communities to make sure that the investments that the provincial and federal government are making are going to be worthwhile, because that's where the density is going to go. But also the missing middle, the gentle density. I introduced a 4-plex motion in the city of Mississauga to make sure that we're finding more places in the city of Mississauga and our existing neighborhoods to have that gentle density. And when people are afraid of things like that, I say I live in a 4-plex. I live in a semi-detached house with a basement apartment on both sides, and we've had those in the city of Mississauga for 50 years. And that's what we need to continue building.
Creating the situation that allows for building is one thing. Getting developers to actually build is another.
Yeah.
That has been challenging through higher interest rates and higher costs for construction. How do you actually do that?
Well, there's a lot of different options, and we just need to look at the examples we see here in Toronto and in Guelph, places where that we've worked with builders in order to provide some land, government land, to ensure that affordable housing gets built. Toronto Housing Now project is a good example where we've been able to provide land to ensure that housing is built and it's affordable, because right now the market conditions aren't great, right? Mm-hmm. Interest rates are still high, construction costs are still high. So it's a unique opportunity for municipalities to get involved and to ensure that the housing gets built.
You have proposed 4 new rapid bus transit lines for Mississauga. How do you actually pay for something like that?
Yeah, so the great thing about bus rapid transit, David, is that we can get it built in years, not in decades. I used to work in the Ontario government. We announced the Hurontario LRT 12 years ago. It's not done. right? It's going to take another year or two, and we're getting there, but that's a long time to get a project going. And we've seen how long Eglinton is taking. LRTs and subways are great. Everybody loves talking about that. It costs billions and billions of dollars, and it takes over a decade to get them built. Bus rapid transit we can do in years, and we can do for a fraction of the cost. We need to create a rapid transit network across the city of Mississauga that hits every corner to give people more options. We're a city built for cars, 100%. Almost 90% of every trip taken in the city of Mississauga is done by car. But that's because we don't have a rapid transit network that's viable for people to take as an alternative to driving, nor do we have safe separated bike lanes across the city of Mississauga. Well, then that's why we end up fighting over, individual projects like Bloor.
Okay, I want to talk about bike lanes in a moment, but let me just finish off on bus lines. How do you actually pay for the 4 new ones you have planned?
We have the capacity within our budget.
Some of that relies on going into the contingency fund. Is this a contingency? Is this emergency?
It's important that we're investing in the right places, and we need to have additional transit investments in the city of Mississauga. And yes, absolutely, it's going to be using the infrastructure budget that we have in order to do that.
Let's talk about bike lanes, because in the debate that we hosted, you were there. That was a point of stickiness, of disputes between the candidates. How are you different from the others?
Well, I chair the cycling committee. I think it's important that we're creating safe, separated bike lanes. My wife won't go around the city with me when I want to bike around town, because we have so many gaps in the system where sometimes you're on the road and it's just paint, sometimes there's a little bit of a bollard, sometimes there's a multi-use trail, sometimes there's nothing. And in most places there's nothing, to be honest. We're not a city that was built for that. So until we give people the options to have safe, separated bike lanes across the city of Mississauga that are on the boulevard, that aren't, sharing the road with trucks and cars, no one's going to use it as an option. So we need to accelerate the cycling master plan from 30 years to 5 years so that it's less painful for us to go through these individual projects.
You're proposing to freeze property taxes until 2026. Now,
I'm the only one willing to freeze property taxes.
Okay, so let's unpack that, because if I look next door, the city of Toronto, that was effectively the policy, or keeping it at very, very minimal increases. And a consequence of that is the city basically didn't have the money to do what it needed to do, and ended up facing a very large,
almost 10%,
increase this year. How would your plan be any different if you were to freeze now? How do people not know they're just going to pay for it later?
Yeah, it's very different because, one, I'll say that the city of Mississauga has always been very well run, fiscally speaking. With the last 2 mayors have been very prudent in terms of how we manage our finances, and we have a large reserve. We also have a plan to see how we're going to pay for that. So we're not actually cutting back any services. We're not cutting back infrastructure. What we're doing is we're using 20% of the reserve, not 100% like Brampton did, 20% of the reserve to help pay for the tax freeze for the next 2 years. And the reason this is important, David, is that people are struggling now more than ever. We have the second highest taxes in the GTA, just behind Brampton. We also have the most unaffordability in the GTA outside of Toronto. This is unacceptable. People are going to the food bank in droves. We're hitting new records every single month. The only tool that the city of Mississauga has, we can't change price of gas, we can't change the price of groceries. The only tool we have is to lower or freeze property taxes. And so my plan is to freeze property taxes for the next 2 years, which is the rest of this term because we're in a by-election, for every property owner in the city of Mississauga, to lower them for low-income seniors so they can continue aging in place and stay in their own homes, which is good for their health, and by cut small business property taxes by 15%. And we're going to pay for this by using 20% of the reserve in the tax stabilization so that we're not cutting back and losing money in the system. And we're going to continue building and hit our housing targets. We only hit 39% of our housing targets. So we lost $32 million from the federal government last year, from the provincial government last year. And when we continue hitting our housing targets, we're going to get another $28 million from the federal government. And we're going to expand our tax base, which is what Hazel McCallion did. For decades, she built the city of Mississauga and continued to build the city of Mississauga because she understood that more homes equals lower taxes. And that's what we're going to do. We're also going to introduce a vacant homes tax, which we've been working on for the last couple of years. I'd argue we're going to try to do it better than Toronto did so that we're not going to face some of the same challenges.
For the small business owners out there who are listening and saying, okay, I hear you on cutting property tax increases, but what if we rent? Then we're not paying property tax. What do you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to create the best business environment possible, right? And so there's only so many levers we have. But what we're trying to do is create and launch a new organization in Mississauga called Invest Mississauga, because we have 100,000 businesses in the city of Mississauga, which is great. It's the driver, it's the economic driver of our city. And I believe that's why we're so successful as a city, is because we have that. So for those that own property, that's great. For the rest of them, what we want to do is pass down additional savings, create the conditions for them to be successful across the city.
All right. One last thing to you in our final 30 seconds. Turnout, obviously very important. Only
Yeah.
1 in 5 people voted in the last mayoral election in Mississauga. What's your pitch?
I think we have the most exciting platform right now, where we've spent a lot of time
Yeah,
talking.
but why should they vote?
Yeah,
you-
well,
you're doing your pitch for
this is-
yourself, and I
this
get
is-
that. It's the thing you're supposed to do. But what's your pitch for them to come out and vote?
Well, this is a change election. It really matters. It really matters whether or not you're going to vote for somebody who wants to build more housing, who wants to build more transit, who's going to make the city more affordable versus not. And so there's a real stark choice. The city of Mississauga has been used to voting, one way or another for decades, for most of people's lives in the city. This is the first time they have a real choice. Only 21%, like you said, voted in the last election. That's unacceptable. I find the municipal level the most important level for people to engage in. If you call 911 and nobody answers and there's not enough resources there, you're going to notice. If your garbage doesn't get picked up, you're going to notice. If you don't have a house that you can afford, you're going to notice. Whereas the federal government and provincial government, while they do important work, it's not that immediate need that you have in the city of Mississauga. Right now, we need people to go out and vote. We think we have the numbers. We've seen the polls that have come out in the last day that are really, really encouraging, where we're within the margin of error of the front runner, and we've got the real shot to get there and get this done and win this election.
Alvin Tedjo, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, David.
We have been talking throughout the course of this week about Mississauga, which is voting for a new mayor on Monday. So we are in the final stretch of that campaign, and we are speaking to leading candidates, among them Carolyn Parrish, who is in studio with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
As we've been asking all of the candidates so far, in about 30 seconds, can you describe how you are different from the other leading candidates?
I'm very different in that I've been in the business of politics for about 35 years. I was a school trustee. I was a member of parliament with Mr. Kretchen, and I've been a councillor for 13 years. The other candidates don't have that experience.
There have been a number of debates. You have not been at most of them, and you cited safety and security as a reason why, that there were threats. Can you describe what those were?
Well, they were threats that came through to our campaign office, and it wasn't a choice to get out of debates because I love them, but it was a lot of pressure, a lot of clips that didn't actually finish sentences, and I was very concerned about my volunteers. We have a lot of young people on our campaign, and it just got messy and nasty, and I just didn't want them involved in all that.
Were these threats reported to Peel Police?
I think Kim did report one. I'm not sure, but
Kim is
my campaign manager.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I can't answer that question.
All right. Let's talk about taxes. You say the city will control its budgets by doing quarterly consultations with every ward. Isn't that something that councillors are already doing?
No, it's not. Usually the budget's built by staff, and as you get towards the end of the year, we hold a public meeting or two, but the budget's pretty much set. And I think if you do it quarterly within the different wards, you're going to get a good feel for what people really want. We pass a lot of motions during the year. They always have money attached to them, and it's good to check on with people every 3 months to say, here's a list. Which ones do you think are important to you?
And I mean, what do you do if people say all of them are important to us? I mean, you don't have a fully costed platform that is out there. Why not?
It's impossible to cost a municipal platform because you don't have a leader who sets policy. You have a leader who has one vote and works through getting cooperation out of the other councillors. You have 11 councillors that all have their own way of thinking. So you can't really cost it. What you can say is, I would like to see this happen, and I would like to lead people into agreeing to it, but you can't set an agenda.
We've certainly been talking to all the candidates about transit. You have talked about a significant east-west connector to the new Ontario LRT being essential, but there isn't a plan in your platform to actually make that happen. Do you have a plan?
You can't have a plan because all that major transit stuff is done by the province, and they've set their plan to 2035, and it does not include an east-west in Mississauga. So we would have to lobby really hard to get them to change that.
Do you think that's possible?
Anything is possible.
Because Mississauga has the challenge now, not in 2035.
Correct.
Yeah. How do you advocate for the city at the provincial and federal levels?
I think you work really hard to get along with the leaders of those two governments. We're at their mercy for grants, and I think also you pull together with the other two mayors of the region of Peel, and we make our case.
We've talked to the other candidates about bike lanes along Bloor. Where do you stand on that? Some have said they think the decision that has already been put in place, and that is to reduce from 4 to 3 the number of travel lanes along Bloor to make way for bike lanes, that decision should stand. Others are saying it should be reviewed. Others were opposed to it altogether. Where do you stand?
Well, strangely enough, I voted against it, but I recognize that it's a policy that passed with a considerable margin at the city. There's a lot of work been done on the design already. There's money been spent. You can always reopen something and look at it again, but I'm not in favor of it.
Housing. What is your plan?
Housing is a very interesting plan. It's very important to the city of Mississauga. We've lost 40,000 residents since the last census, mostly young people. They can't afford to live in Mississauga. They can't afford the rent, and they can't buy property. So I would like to rezone. We've got 163 acres on Hurontario, right on the LRT that's zoned office. And as you probably know, we don't need to build office space right now. So I'd like to rezone that mixed use and put some apartments in there.
So this is an area that would be along a transit corridor.
Correct.
There is a discussion about where else it might go. Are you, for instance, in favor of expanding the use of fourplexes across the city of Mississauga?
I have no problem with fourplexes, but that's not going to solve the problem. It's a very small approach. We have 3 large plaza owners. One is Heartland that showed us a plan where they take a quarter of the stores out and they put in 22 mid-rise apartments and a greenway. I'm very much in favor of that.
You worked at, almost all levels of politics. Why this now?
I think I'm the most experienced. I love being a city councillor. It's my favorite job I've ever had. And the opportunity to lead council for up to 6 years really appeals to me.
You you're facing an election where in the last municipal election, only 1 in 5 people voted. Beyond just your desire to have them vote for you, what is your pitch to have the people of Mississauga vote at all?
I've been making that pitch for the whole 3 months of this campaign. You have to tell people how important it is for them to get out and vote, and then they can be critical of the decisions. If they don't vote, they just float along unaware. So they have to get out and vote, and I would hope they would vote for me, but if not, getting out and voting is more important than anything.
I want to loop back to the talk of a costed platform. You say you can't cost because you only have 1 vote and because things like transit projects are so reliant on other levels of government. But how do you expect people to give you that vote if they don't know what voting for you will cost them in terms of the promises you're making?
Well, I'm going to go back to the quarterly consultations with the public rather than the one big one at the end, and suggest that if we keep consulting with the public, for example, a lot of people have talked about windrows. I don't know if you shovel your driveway, but you shovel your driveway and then the plow comes along and builds an ice castle at the base of it. I think that's something that needs to be discussed. We've tried to get that through several times and it keeps failing. I got $1 bus fares for seniors, had to go at it 3 times. So it's a very complex issue because you don't have everybody marching in the same direction. You have them marching in 11 directions. So you have to go back to consulting more frequently.
You haven't been at those debates, but you've certainly been featured in the debates with
yes.
the other candidates attacking some of your positions. And one of the things that they attack you on is sort of this, what they would describe as the vagueness of your platform, that they say there's no major transit commitments, no major housing commitments. What do you say to the criticism that your platform is a bit thin?
It isn't thin at all. I just put a piece out that goes into every issue, and it gives you the background, and then it gives you what I'd like to do about it. So no, it's not vague at all.
All right, Carolyn Parrish, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The final weekend before the mayoral by-election on Monday, we have heard this week from 3 of the leading candidates in the race, Stephen Dasko, Alvin Tedjo, and Carolyn Parrish. Today, Dipika Damerla is in studio with me. Good morning.
Good morning.
As we have done with the other 3, I wonder if you could take just about 30 seconds and tell us how you are different from the other candidates in this race.
I bring a unique set of experiences. I've worked in the private sector in corporate banking. I have an MBA from the University of Toronto Rotman School of Management. The only candidate who served both at the provincial level, both as an MPP and cabinet minister, and now as city councillor. So all of this experience really sets me apart. But also I think that this experience shows, both in my platform as well as the fact that I have demonstrated that I'm not afraid to stand up for Mississauga residents.
Okay, let's talk about some of the issues in this race, and transit is certainly one of them. And within transit, I'm going to talk about bike lanes, which has been controversial, certainly in the debate where we first met at a debate hosted by CBC last week. You've chosen to campaign on stopping the planned bike lanes that are set to go in on Bloor Street, saying that it will make Bloor more congested. The city has said it will actually save time along Bloor for the average commute. Why are you making this a focus of your campaign?
Well, I believe that there's a better way, and that better way is to keep 4 car lanes, and we can put the bike lanes on the boulevard. It's not a bike versus car conversation. We can have both. And I don't see any reason to take 2 lanes off Bloor Street, because I know, when we've seen what's happened in Toronto, it will create congestion. And there's another thing. Not only is it going to create a lot of congestion, it's going to start diverting cars onto neighborhood streets. And then those neighborhoods don't become less safe. And then the neighborhoods ask for traffic calming. So then we use taxpayer dollars to start putting speed humps on neighborhood streets because we diverted traffic from arterial roads. But there's another thing, and which is by this particular configuration will actually reduce the number of bus stops on Bloor Street. So that's problematic as well. So there is a better way, and that better way is let's keep the 4 car lanes and take and put the bike lanes on the boulevard. My position is, if we want to reduce car dependency in Mississauga, and I support that, we need to do the upfront hard work. Just removing car lanes isn't going to magically mean the cars disappear. All it does is create congestion. Let's build the transit we need. Let's build walkable communities.
A fellow councillor is saying that you lack integrity for undermining a city project that actually has passed council. One of your rivals says you don't have a friend on council. How do you bring people together if you're elected mayor after these kind of seemingly personal attacks?
Well, I think the personal attacks speak more to the person making the attacks rather than me. I have extremely collegial relationships on council. And yes, you know what? This is leadership is having courage. Yes, it is having courage. It is about saying that we got it wrong and we need to fix it. And that's difficult, and that can be controversial. But that doesn't mean you back away.
Would you use strong mayor powers to stop those Bloor Street bike lanes if needed?
I've always said, and I'm going to continue to say, I do not expect to need to use strong mayor powers. I'm seeking a mandate from the people of Mississauga, and I'm saying what I'm going to bring is a pragmatic approach to managing growth. On Bloor Street, the city right now is considering proposals for 1,000 new rental units. That's great. We need those rental units. The city at the same time is demanding that along with those 1,000 rental units, that the builders build 1,200 parking spots. That is tacit admission by the city that if you live on Bloor Street, you need a car. So there's a lot of policy incoherence when you say, oh, we are going to demand 1,200 new parking spots for these new rental buildings, but we're going to take car lanes off. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm putting forward a very pragmatic approach. I'm not doing either or. And I believe I'm seeking a mandate from the people of Mississauga on this.
You brought up the issue of housing, and so I want to talk about fourplexes. This has been a point of difference between you and some of your rivals. You voted against the city's move to allow fourplexes, and as a result, risk losing $120 million in federal funding. Why is it that important to you to stop fourplexes?
Actually, that's not quite correct. What I voted against was the lack of consultation. The original motion said we must or we should pass a motion making fourplexes legal across Mississauga without studies, without public consultation. We often talk about why do people not vote in municipal elections. It's because when politicians try to rush things like this and make it look like the people's input is not important. And what I said was, I said, let's bring back a report. I'd like to know what the report would say about what fourplexes would look like in Mississauga, because there are fourplexes and there are fourplexes. And so because of my motion, the staff did bring back a report. And I actually, David, liked the staff report, because what the staff report said was that a fourplex in Mississauga would largely look like a single-family home. And I actually voted in support of fourplexes once I knew the details of what fourplexes in Mississauga would look like.
Continuing on the topic of housing, your platform contains many details, but it doesn't actually speak about affordable housing, things like rent geared to income. Is that a priority for you?
Absolutely. It's a priority for me. And one of the things that I've talked about a lot is unlocking public land and then partnering with senior levels of government. The one thing the city cannot do single-handedly is build deeply affordable housing. Now, my platform does have a plan to waive development charges to incent purpose-built rentals in Mississauga. And of course, we need a lot of rental building. We need to do both. We need to build market products, whether it's rental or condos or homes, and we need to build deeply affordable. I think cities have a role in both, but the deeply affordable piece, we need the capital funding from the federal and provincial government.
Let's talk again about transportation. You have said you want to build 3 light rail lines and increase service on My Way, Mississauga's transit system. That's going to cost money. It's going to take time. Where are you going to get the money?
Well, all of the transit capital projects, I would look to senior levels of government for funding them. There's no way we can put it on the property tax base. And
So the province essentially has a transit plan out till 2035, saying it has committed the money it intends to spend by that point. What makes you think you can convince the province to reopen that plan?
Some of the pieces that in my transit plan actually build on what Metrolinx already has in the plans. I think it's a conversation for the province and the city. It is a joint venture. Cities, I think, have a good sense, because we're on the ground, as to where we need the transit. And the provincial government obviously has Metrolinx, so it's all about working together. So I believe we'll be very, very successful in advocating, because my plan makes so much sense that I don't see how we wouldn't be able to work together to make it happen.
Your plan does not include a fully costed platform. Why not?
No, actually, it is costed. I'm not sure why you would say that. It's been costed.
Is it every single detail in there you feel is costed?
Yes.
Okay. There are others who would dispute that, but you say it.
Yeah, it's been costed.
All right. Okay. What is your pitch to voters to, if not to vote for you, then to vote at all? Because we know that 1 in 5 voters in the city of Mississauga in the last mayoral election showed up to vote. Means 80% of them didn't. What's your pitch?
My pitch to them is that, listen, I have demonstrated that I will stand up for you, even when it's uncomfortable. And the bike lanes is a very good example. And so I want you to know that your voice will be heard. I will bring a very different way of governing, in which listening to people is very important. I've demonstrated that with the fourplex vote, where there was a desire to just ride roughshod and say, we don't need to hear from the people. This is, we just need to do this because we at City Council know better than the people who live in Mississauga. And I demonstrated, and again, I took a lot of flack for that, but I demonstrated that I will stand up for Mississauga citizens. So I do hope that that sense, the reason people don't vote, David, as you know, is because they often say, my vote doesn't matter. You guys will do whatever you want. I knock on doors and so many people say, oh, it's not going to matter. You're going to do whatever you want to. I want to change that feeling. I've demonstrated that I can do that, and I'll continue to do that.
Dipika Damerla, thank you very much for coming into studio today.
Thank you, David, for having me.